First, he called for reduced penalties for smoking marijuana. Now, Police Commissioner William Bratton wants to explore granting amnesty to 1.2 million city residents with open warrants for low-level offenses. People who run the risk of being arrested for failing to resolve tickets for drinking in public, disorderly conduct, and the like.
All right, NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton there considering granting amnesty for over 1 million low-level offenders in the city of New York, and that's where we'll pick up our roundtable for today. And joining us is Chief Washington columnist for Newsmax, John Gizzi, and also Liz Peek, political columnist as well, joining us via Skype. It's great to have both of you with us. Let's talk about this issue. We see Bill Bratton in that video there holding up a bag of weed, and that's just one of the issues here. New York City dealing with this issue of too many people in the criminal justice system. Is this the tip of the iceberg? Do you expect, Liz, to see more police commissioners and municipalities around the country resorting to these types of tactics to deal with this issue of criminal justice?
Well, I think that's probably true. We probably will see more of these because the current concern is it's costing taxpayers too much money to have so many men in prison, and also it harms community relations to have so many people being locked up, especially amongst African Americans. So, you know, I think the problem is someone's bound to say slippery slope. I think it is a slippery slope. I think when you begin to kind of take the pressure off, and there has been a lot of pressure put on low-level miscreants, let's say, lawbreakers, for about a decade now through broken windows policing and so forth, you begin to backtrack from that, and that's kind of what this is too. And it seems to me you begin to backtrack from the strides that have been made, really substantial strides, on fighting violence and other more important crimes in the cities.
John, I think it was Dana Milbank who wrote recently in the Washington Post kind of taking Cory Booker to task for not really being kind of the guy he promised to be when he was a candidate for the U.S. Senate. But where do things stand now with this bill that's been talked about with Cory Booker and Rand Paul in terms of criminal justice reform?
Well, again, this is a subject that has had many incarnations, and it has evolved into legislation with support from members of Congress of both parties, Democrat Booker and Republican Paul being cases in point, as you point out. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go, in the sense that many municipal and state police departments do grow wary about federal guidelines and federal programs that in some cases may override their own particular guidelines. And I think this is why you see Congress very reluctant to pass federal law enforcement legislation. Crimes differ from state to state as they differ from city to city, and I think that will be the approach. Obviously, New York is headed in a direction of pulling back on minor crimes. The famous Rockefeller laws against drug possession and drug use that came up in the 1970s are now off the books for the most part. In other states, however, they do believe in a hard crackdown. Missouri, for example, after Ferguson, one has an attitude of strong support for the local police and strong support for, as Liz uses the phrase, the no broken windows approach.
All right.
Again, it all comes down to money. In the 1960s, these debates had a particular flavor because everyone felt there would be federal monies for all these things if the states and municipalities couldn't afford them. The Law Enforcement Assistant Administration, LEAA, was always there. Obviously, that's not the case anymore.
All right, well, John, we want to move on to our next topic as well.
Yeah.
And that is this question of whether the GOP will be prepared should the Supreme Court rule as they want them to next month. Let's take a listen to a concern about Obamacare.
The U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in King versus Burwell is expected next month. At issue, the way the Affordable Care Act is worded, the suit calling into question whether the Obama administration is breaking the law by providing subsidies to people in 34 states to help them pay for their health insurance. The High Court's decision could abruptly end coverage for as many as 8 million Americans.
Well, Liz, do you think that the GOP and Congress are prepared to deal with what could happen in the Supreme Court?
Well, if they are, they haven't shared that with anybody. I think that I think the GOP is on test ground now, if you will. I think they need to prove that they can govern, that they have solutions, and they're not just obstructionist. I think, that meme, if you will, has been very well publicized by President Obama, who blames everything on an obstructionist Congress. But let's face it, now they're in control. I think McConnell's done a very good job of actually getting some things done. There's more to be done. But if this thing is decided against the administration, and if, in fact, Obamacare, as a result, is sort of thrown up into the air and really demands serious revision, I think the GOP has to be totally ready with solutions. And by the way, I don't think it's that hard to come up with some fixes.
Well, there's plenty of solutions out there. There are plenty of ideas floated. They just can't seem to wrap their arms around just one of them. And we'll check back with you guys next week and see if Congress was able to get everything done, including this issue. John Gizzi, Liz Peek, thanks so much for being with us. All right, welcome you back to the roundtable. John Gizzi and Liz Peek. And before we get on to our next topic, which is Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal and his move to protect religious freedom in his state, I wanted to ask you, John, if you wanted to chime in there on what Liz was saying. We know the GOP is working up against the clock to find a compromise on the trade deal, the NSA agreement, and the transportation issue, the trust fund, the highway trust fund. But what about this issue of Obamacare and the chance that the Supreme Court could toss out a lot of these subsidies? Are they prepared to deal with this?
Less than an hour ago, I was with the person who is the point person on the Health Subcommittee of the House Energy Committee, dealing exclusively with health care issues and what will happen if Obamacare is struck down or severely wounded by King v. Burwell. She pointed out that there are more than 100 pieces of legislation on the table, ranging from being able to keep one's own health insurance to being able to purchase health care across state lines the way one does with automobile insurance, and that would bring costs down. There's many other suggestions, but one thing that will not be there, and I think this is why people think Republicans don't have a plan, they don't have an alternative for health care that upends a system in which more than 90% of the participants were very happy with their plans. That's what the Affordable Care Act did. This would deal just with people who are in need or who are paying too much for their health insurance. But I assure you, the plans are there on the table, and as they all say, it will not be comprehensive. We don't do comprehensive well. Fine. They're going to deal with what ails the system, not the system itself.
Now, but let me ask you, follow up there real quickly. You think they would be able to put together a package of those bills to, there are concerns that have been raised by some that people could lose their health insurance and coming out of pocket to pay for this. Are there specific provisions in place that would deal with those types of scenarios? John.
Oh, hey, I'm sorry.
No,
Yes, that was a follow-up question.
Except it will not be a full plan. It would be things that deal with it individually, and it would also permit the laws that emerge from a Republican Congress would give greater deference to the states. Governor Walker of Wisconsin has his Badger Care. Governor Pence of Indiana has Hoosier Care. And I do believe there would be more deference to the state in terms of providing health care to those who are truly in need of it. That's what one will see when Republican alternatives emerge.
All right, fair enough.
All right. So you mentioned Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. As John just said, he issued an executive order stopping the state from denying or revoking tax exemptions, deductions, licenses, or employment against anyone who acts in accordance with the belief that marriage is between one man and one woman. Liz, is this a bold move?
It's a bold move and probably not a very popular one. I mean, Jindal's clearly going after a I think, a fairly narrow segment of voters in his effort to sort of raise his profile, and that's that's the evangelical vote, which I know is very important in Iowa and some other states. But look, I mean, this is a very tough argument, I think, because discrimination is discrimination, and it's pretty clear across the country that same-sex marriage is becoming increasingly accepted. Pretty much, the polling is pretty undeniable on that. And secondly, I think most people feel that discriminating against people who want to perform same-sex marriages, get married to their partner, etc., is discrimination just like it is against blacks or anybody else. So I think this is a no-win issue. I actually do have some sympathy with the idea that you own a small business and you choose not to serve somebody. That's kind of your right. But then after all, that could be someone who's Jewish or someone who's black.
It's complicated.
That's the law of the land. Yeah, it is.
Well, John, is this a prelude to his presidential run?
I think it is. And remember, underscoring Governor Jindal's candidacy, and indeed the way he has governed, has been the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Each state is different, and I do believe that many people who support same-sex marriage would also agree that this is an issue that is best left to the states. And what is preferred in Louisiana may not be preferred in New York or California. The same, too, with the interpretation of discrimination and how that is. Or one could simply say that one's religious belief trump all, that Muslims, for example, who are required to dress a certain way, are finding their own personal coda violated.
Yeah.
Again, I prefer to leave those matters up to the state, and that's where Governor Jindal comes from.
Well, we'll
John
see.
Gizzi, yeah, we'll see what will happen.
If the Supreme Court decides to leave it up to the states, it could all be moot come June as well. Another Supreme Court issue hangs in the balance.
Exactly.
John Gizzi, Liz Peek, thank you so much for sticking around for our second roundtable. Always good to have you.